Hey everyone, welcome to today's lesson. My name is Wes. This is Interactive English, and if this is your first time here, our channel, it's all about helping you practice and improve your English skills. And today, it's going to be a discussion lesson. I'm going to have a little discussion with all of you. So it's good for your listening if you want to just follow along and listen to this discussion. Also, I'm going to be giving you some new vocabulary. So as we go through and talk about our topic, which is about education, I'm going to put together a vocabulary list of some different words or phrases that I've picked out, and I'll give you the meaning. And then after the lesson, I will put all of those vocabulary words down in the description. So I just want to give a quick shout out, a quick hello to those of you who are with me in the chat. Hello, Aiden. Hello, Sleepwalker, Lolly, Mary Jane, Saeed. So excellent. Thank you guys for joining me today. And the discussion that we're going to have today, and I'll have some other questions for you. It's all about well, it's mostly about teachers, but as also it applies to learners, because there are many teachers out there that watch our lessons, that follow this channel, and I get a lot of different questions. I love hearing from other English teachers, and you get to hear about their experiences and what's happening. So I wanted to share with you some of my own experiences and offer up some advice that is going to really be talking about, okay, what do you need to know when you enter the classroom? And most of the advice is geared toward teachers, and I'm going to share with you my experience, that the knowledge that I've gained after 15 years of teaching English, but some of it is relevant to learners as well. So when we go through this, I'm going to be talking about how it applies to both teachers and learners. So the first thing that I want to tell you, which is an expression that I want to teach you, is that, look, I'm going to be talking about my experience. I'm going to be talking about my opinions, my thoughts. And I would say, again, just take everything with a grain of salt. You might agree with me about some things. You may disagree with me about others. But this is something that I tell English learners all the time, or anybody. You know, it's good to take things with a grain of salt. And if you don't know what this expression means, we're going to add it. This is going to be the first one we're going to add to our vocabulary list right here. So if you tell somebody, you know, take things with a grain of salt, it just means that you should, not believe everything is true. To doubt things. So when I say that I'm going to be talking to you again about my experience, that might be different from your experience in the classroom, and that's perfectly okay. So again, even though I'm sharing my opinions, I'd still tell you, take things with a grain of salt. Just keep that in mind. So that is the first expression that I really wanted to teach you today. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing that I would tell a teacher, especially a new teacher, and I think this applies to anybody who's going to start a new job. And the way I'm going to do this is go through some of these quotes that I found that I think are relevant, that I just kind of enjoy. And if you can't read that, because I had a tough time finding the picture with it, it says, "A bad attitude is like a flat tire. If you don't change it, you'll never go anywhere." And I think this is so true. So the first thing that I would tell people is that, you need to make sure that you have the right attitude. If you decide that, you're interested in teaching, make sure, that that's something that you are passionate about, and because that's going to help you have that right attitude. And the first question that I'd ask for all of you guys who are even in the chat right now, have you ever had a teacher that you just didn't get along with? That for some reason, their attitude, their behavior, the way they acted, you just didn't get along with this person, and why? Why is it that you feel like you didn't get along? Write that to me. Let me know. I'd love to hear back from you guys and see what you think. Because I always say that, your attitude is infectious. If you go into the classroom with a very positive attitude, it's going to influence the attitude of the learners. And of course, you want your students, your learners, to have a positive attitude because that's going to create an atmosphere that makes it easier to learn and understand the information you want to tell them. Of course, I know that there are people, everybody has a bad day. That's perfectly fine. It's normal. And I noticed that when I've had bad days and I've taken that attitude into the classroom, more often than not, those lessons are not the best lessons. It's affected me and it's affected my learners, and you can tell that's a problem. So again, it's something to think about as you go into the classroom, especially if you are doing this for the first time and you are entering a new class. I think it's so important that if you are starting a new class, to make sure you get off on the right foot and go in there with a very positive attitude. First impressions are so important. So let's add a couple more words to the vocabulary list. I told you you want to go into the classroom with a positive attitude. You want to make sure that you get off on the right foot. And what that means, it's an expression, to get off on the right foot. It means that you start out a relationship, let me say, in a positive way. So I think whatever job you do, it's important. If you're your coworkers or your boss, you want to get off on the right foot. For teachers, you want to start your classes off on the right foot. And I also told you for new classes, first impressions are so important. And if you hear this word talking about a first impression, it's the way someone, initially thinks about you. All right. What do they think about you? That is your first impression. And you always want to make a good first impression, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a businessman, a businesswoman, whatever job, first impressions are good. So again, some people, you guys are sharing with me in the chat. Excellent. Miguel said, I believe one of the university hated me because he saw me as a threat. I was confident and going for big projects, simply did not like me at all. Okay, that's a great example. When maybe if you get into the classroom and if you think that way of another student, then that's definitely not a way to get off on the right foot. So again, that is a great example. Miguel, thanks for sharing with us. He said, who is it? Kadebek said, yes, I have a teacher he didn't listen when I answered and he decreased my results. And that's something that I do want to talk about a little later. We're going to talk about listening. So I told you that it's important to go in there with just a positive attitude. Again, I think a lot of these things are fairly common sense, but it's important that people, even though that we should know these things, it's always good to hear it again and again and again, and to really think about that, because we can all be better. The next thing that I would say is that it's very important to know your audience. Now, this is something that I tell to students all the time. I say, know your audience. And the reason is it's important. You would say you need to know your audience when you are writing or if you are giving a presentation. Because if you're writing, you want to know who is reading your essay, who is reading your email, because you're not always going to write it the same way. The same goes with a presentation. And what I would ask you guys, this question, let me know. I'd like to hear your experience. Have you ever given a presentation or you were giving a talk to a group of people, and as you got into it, you realized that, okay, this is the wrong audience? Perhaps you were trying to tell a joke or you were trying to say something to the group and you realized, okay, this is not the right audience for what I'm trying to say. So this is definitely something that I would tell learners all the time for presentations, for writing. You need to know your audience. And I would say that the exact same goes for teachers as well. You need to know your audience. You need to know who the students are. For example, I first started teaching a long time ago in South Korea. Annyeonghaseyo to anybody out there who's in South Korea. And I first started teaching children. And I was teaching, I taught a school for about a year. And I was teaching children that were around, fourth, fifth grade. They were high elementary school students. And then I switched from teaching children to teaching at a university. So I went from children to university. And I remember when I first got in there and started teaching university, the very first class that I had, I said, okay, one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the rules of the class. What are some of the expectations? And I realized as I started going through it, I was kind of treating the situation as though it were still children, about like, don't do this, you can't do that, no running around in the classroom. And as I started doing it, I realized, okay, this is not the right audience. These are students that were anywhere from 18 to 22 years old. It was not a bunch of children. And again, that's a very important thing when a teacher, they need to know their audience, they need to know their students. The other thing that I would tell teachers when it comes to knowing your students is typically one of the first things that a teacher should do is a needs assessment. So when you get into learning about teaching English, teachers might do a needs assessment. And basically that just means that they need to understand what the students, the learners, what do they need to do in order to improve the most? It's basically like talking about that gap between, well, what do the students know now and where do they want to be in the future? And that gap in between, those are the needs, the student needs, and you need to understand what those needs are. And you can do different types of a needs assessment. If you're a teacher, you can do just like student feedback. And this is something that I would do. I would go into a classroom, especially with adults, and I did this with my university students, and I would ask them, even the first day, and have them write down, what are some things that you hope to accomplish in this course? And I would ask them other questions. What do you think is the most difficult part of learning English? So automatically, I was trying to have them identify the greatest challenges that they think exist and what they want to accomplish, because then I could take that information and try to shape my lesson plans around that to better help them throughout the course. So you could do student feedback. You could even do a quiz. That's another great way to do a needs assessment. But again, for teachers, it's very important to know your audience, understand, well, who the students are and what does everybody need. Of course, it's very difficult for like on a platform like this as a teacher. All of you are different ages, different parts of the world. I'm not able to speak with you one-on-one directly. So again, a lot of the information that we have on our channel, I try to do a variety, do vocabulary that is a little more difficult, some vocabulary that might be easier. I try to do a little bit of grammar. And again, the level is going to vary because many of you are at different levels as well. But if you're going into the classroom, needs assessment is very important. So let's look at the next thing that I would tell you is this quote right here. I love this quote. This is a famous quote that is, it's attributed to Louis Pasteur. And it's just chance favors the prepared mind. And I think this goes without saying, okay? And that is another great, expression. If somebody says, this goes without saying. So I'm gonna add that to our vocabulary list right here. So if somebody says that sentence and they say, this goes without saying, it kind of means, well, it means exactly what it says. You're basically telling somebody, kind of like, yeah, you should know the information that I'm about to tell you. And people would say that when they're getting ready to say something that most people already know that may be a little bit of common sense. So I could say that this right now, it goes without saying, chance favors the prepared mind. And basically it's just saying, don't underestimate the power of preparedness, that you as a teacher and both as a learner, this is a you need to be prepared. You need to be ready. And especially as a teacher, and I feel like this has happened to me where something's going on in your life and for some reason you're not able to prepare as well as you would like to. And typically in my experience when that happens, the class it's not as good as those classes where I'm able to prepare every activity. I know very well what I want to do, and those classes tend to be better. That you need to really prepare and keep that in mind. And when I say prepare, especially as teachers, you need to have a syllabus. You need to know what you're going to do throughout the course. When you're planning lessons, you need to have a lesson plan. You would be surprised at over the years how many teachers I've met, and some of them they just don't use lesson plans. And I think it's a little strange, but again, the more prepared you are, the better that you're going to have a successful class, and that's better for the learners as well. A syllabus, a lesson plan. I would also say you need to show transparency. How are grades going to be determined? How are you going to do that? And tell the learners what they need to expect. This is something that I think has always helped me, that if I had a class, for example, and it was going to be one semester, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The very first week, I would go in there and I would tell the students, okay, this is what we're going to do every Monday. This is what we're going to do every Wednesday. And this is what we're going to do every Friday. And I create that routine so students know what to expect every day when they come to class. Of course, the lessons are going to be different, but there's that expectation. And I've always found that in my experience, again, routine really has helped the students because they know what to expect, they know what they're doing, they're more likely to do the work that you assign them, and it helps them come to class more prepared if they know what the routine is and they know what to expect. And I'm not saying a routine that, for example, what I would do would be like maybe a warm-up. And I'd say, okay, every Monday we're going to do idiom of the day. And I teach a new idiom. And that's our warm-up, and we'd have a discussion. Every Wednesday, maybe we'd go over some new type of academic vocabulary. And then we'd have a discussion on that. So again, establish some sort of routine so that the students know what to expect. And for learners, when I say try to be prepared, I think again, maybe think about your long-term and your short-term goals. Where is it that you want to be, and how are you going to get there? And what's going to help you prepare in order to accomplish those short-term goals and to accomplish those long-term goals? All right, so the next thing that I would tell you as teachers, if you're going into the classroom, would be this, is what works for some may not work for others. Okay, so teachers, I'd say especially, they need to understand that all learners are different. And that for some learners, certain styles and methods and approaches are going to be more beneficial than it might be for other students. And the reason I say this is because I would tell teachers, you need to try a variety of methods and a variety of approaches. And when you start, I think, learning to become a teacher, you learn about these different methods. For example, there is what's called the direct method. And this is a method where you only use the target language and you're learning more everyday vocabulary and sentences. There's another approach which is called total physical response. This is an approach which is more for kinesthetic learners. It's about, you're moving around, you're getting up out of your chair. And some people who learn that way, who are more kinesthetic learners, and it helps them remember things to move around. This is a great approach that they can use, total physical response. There's also one that I like, and again, this is my personal preference. For any of you out there who are listening, it's called content and language integrated learning. Sometimes it's shortened to CLIL. And what this means, content and language integrated learning, it's basically you are teaching a language while you're teaching some other topic, and you're using the target language to teach something else. And this is what happens at international schools all the time, where students will learn math, but they will learn math in English. And because of that, they're not only learning math, but they're also learning the English language. They're learning new vocabulary that's related to math. They're constantly reading in English. They're constantly listening to English. And as you're learning this other subject, you're able to learn the language. So that is one of my personal favorites. But again, in this case, as a teacher, what I would tell people is that you should try to use an eclectic approach. And that's actually the next vocabulary word that I wanted to teach you is eclectic. Because some of you may be wondering, well, what does that mean? What does eclectic mean? So let's go back over to our vocabulary list and I'm going to write it down. If you're talking about something that is eclectic, it is an adjective. So I'll go ahead and write that down. And what it means is that it's talking about it is using a variety of sources, or it comes from a variety of sources. So I'm talking about you should use an eclectic approach, which basically means that somebody is using all of those methods that I just talked about. You're using the direct method, you're doing a little TPR, and you're having students move around the classroom. You're also doing some content and language integrating learning by you're studying some other topic, but you're doing it in English. That would be an eclectic approach. Now, often when I think about using this word, I think about somebody talking about maybe art. And they would say that somebody has an eclectic taste, that they have a taste that is developed from a variety of sources. And they say, oh, it's very eclectic. So I often think that this is a word that you may hear when people are talking about art, but just keep that in mind. What works for some may not work for others. And that's something I tell, when we're talking about variety, that's something I tell learners all the time. Try to get a variety. Recently, I just had a lesson on talking about listening and how you can improve your skills. And one of the very first thing we talked about was a variety. Try to get a variety of listening, whether you are listening to these videos on YouTube, you're listening to an audiobook or a podcast or even music. Variety is always good. So if you're a learner, remember that. Keep that in mind. Variety, can't go wrong. The next little bit of advice that I would like to share with teachers and learners would be about mistakes, in talking about mistakes. And again, this is another quote which is attributed to Albert Einstein, and it just says, a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. And I think what everybody needs to realize, I think, again, this goes without saying, is that mistakes, it's a fact of life. And that is actually the next expression or next phrase that I wanted to add. If you say that something is a fact of life, it's just an expression that people use. Let's go over to our vocabulary list. But it's a common one. And basically what you're just trying to say is that, well, this thing is true. You'd say that something is a fact of life. So this is a great expression, phrase that you can use. And you're trying to kind of emphasize that something is true. And I'll add, and cannot be avoided. All right. And I just told you right then, I said mistakes, it's a fact of life. If you are teaching, you're going to make mistakes. If you are learning a language, such as English, you're going to make mistakes. Even in the chat right now, I want you guys to think, as a learner, what is the last mistake that you made? And I know that if you feel comfortable, share that with us. Because again, the one thing I would say is try to embrace your mistakes. It's a fact of life. We all make them. I know that some people, if you make a mistake, it can really get you down. And that makes it, as a learner, it makes it harder for you to continue, especially when it comes to something like speaking. I think if somebody makes a speaking mistake and then they get corrected, they might feel a little self-conscious and think, oh, that was a silly mistake. Why did I do that? and they may become a little bit more, maybe a little shy, and they're a little more reticent to speak the next time. But even as a teacher, you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. I still make mistakes. And I think as a teacher, the most important thing is that you're going to learn from those mistakes, that you're not going to avoid them, but just think about, okay, how can I do this better in the future? Because when you do a lesson, quite often you're going to teach that lesson again, possibly to another class. And you can think about that mistake and think, okay, why did I make this mistake? How can I avoid it the next time? So if you're talking about avoiding a mistake in your lesson, then that's great. You can do that. And the same goes for learners. If you make a mistake in speaking, in grammar, in writing, whatever it is, then if you can identify it, the goal is not to avoid using this word or phrase or try to avoid using this grammar, but just to practice, and then the next time try to use it and do it correctly. So as a teacher, you're definitely going to make mistakes. Even as a learner, try to embrace them and understand that. I'll give you an example just to make fun of myself a little bit. Recently, I did a live lesson talking about adjectives that are adjectives that are followed by prepositions. That was the lesson that I had put together. But I made a mistake, and on one of the very first slides, I had the word verbs. And it was a mistake. I should have changed the word to adjectives. But when I started doing the live lesson, for some reason, I got it in my mind, okay, we're talking about verbs. And through the entire first half of the lesson, I kept talking about verbs instead of saying adjectives. And I realized that halfway throughout the lesson. And if you were to go back, if you were to find the lesson, you will see that I kind of froze. And I was like, oh no, I just realized I've made a huge mistake because I've been using the wrong part of speech. I corrected it. I kept going through with the lesson. But again, it was a mistake. It was an embarrassing mistake, but I've left it up there. So again, like what I asked you guys about some mistakes. Let's see. Vicky shared, if you make a speaking mistake in German, sometimes they switch to English on you, and that doesn't help at all, and it's annoying. That is an excellent point. I think sometimes when, especially it's happened to me, when as an English speaker and you're trying to learn another language, since many people out there are many speakers of English, and they feel very confident in their language skills. You're trying to learn a language, but then when somebody switches back to English, it can make you feel a little down. You're like, oh, I'm trying to practice this other language. When I lived, another quick story, when I lived in Costa Rica, Pura Vida, to anybody out there who's in Costa Rica, I would often meet people, and I was learning Spanish, and I could speak Spanish, but I would meet people from Costa Rica. They would see me, they'd want to practice their English skills. And even if my Spanish was much better than their English, I still would speak to them in English because I knew that they just wanted to practice, they wanted to improve their skills, and I think that's what would help them the most. So again, that is a great point. Thanks for sharing with us, Vicky. So the next little quote, the little piece of advice that I'd have for you, and this is another great. I heard this a long time ago, and I was like, oh, this is so true. And it says, a teacher is a person who never says anything once. I think when I heard this the first time, it was like, a great teacher is a person who never says anything once. And this is so true. If you are a teacher, or you want to become a teacher, or you're getting ready to be a teacher, you have to realize that you need to repeat, 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 and just keep saying it again and again and again. And you need to get comfortable with that, because that is the best way that not only people are going to learn it, but they're going to remember it. And I'm not talking about just learning English. You do this with new vocabulary. I don't know, many of you have seen our lessons, and I'll do a vocabulary lesson and I'll teach a word. And then later on in the lesson, I'll say it again. And typically, I'll just try to keep repeating the words throughout the lesson, hoping that you just learned it, that maybe you have a better understanding of the meaning. So you need to do this whether you're talking about, well, for English teachers, new vocabulary. You need to do this with grammar and just repeat the information. You need to do this with homework assignments as well. You can't just tell a student or a learner like, okay, this is your homework assignment, or this is what I want you to do for your essay, or this is what I want you to read. You need to say it again and again and again, and just understand and know that you need to repeat yourselves. Because I think for some people, when you first enter this profession and you have to repeat yourself, it can be a little annoying, and you're like, oh, why do I have to keep telling you the same thing? But as a teacher, you need to be patient. You need to realize, okay, you're going to need to say the same thing again and again and again, because a teacher is a person who never says anything once. And I think this is a good time to point out, as a learner, I think it's very important that you need to listen, to understand that this is going to require your complete concentration. You need to listen, because I think we've all been there. If you stop listening, and it's very easy to tune out if you're listening to another language. And when you tune out and you stop focusing, you try to come back into the conversation, and you're like, wait, what just happened? I completely missed what somebody said. So that's another word. Let's add it to our vocabulary list, to tune out. And that is a phrasal verb. So if we go over here, and I said, if you're learning another language, it's very easy to tune out. So you can tune out something, or you can tune out someone. And it basically means to stop paying attention. And again, yeah, this would happen to me when I was learning Spanish. And I would try so hard to focus. But especially at the beginning, if I'm involved in a conversation, it was very easy to tune out. And then suddenly I tried to join the conversation again, and it's like, oh no, I'm lost. What is everybody talking about? So again, when you think about, you enter the classroom as a learner, you really, again, you need to focus, you need to listen, because that's going to help you better follow along with the lesson. And then when the teacher says something the first time, you may hear it, you may remember it. Exactly. So let's look at the next one. The next little piece of advice I have is to strive for continuous improvement instead of perfection. And this is something else that I think is relevant for, well, any job, that it's good to strive for continuous improvement instead of perfection. I would tell learners the same thing, because, well, if you're talking about teaching, if you're talking about learning another language, there's always room for improvement. And, well, that's another great expression. Let's write it down. I'd said there's always room for improvement. And I would say that this is kind of a collocation. If you say that there is room for improvement, it basically means that there is space for somebody to improve. A room for improvement, all right? There is, well, I'll just say more space in which someone can improve. All right. So this is I said it's like it's a collocation. It's a phrase you might frequently hear somebody use this if they're talking about, well, their own skills. Like I'd say, even with Spanish, I've lived in several different Spanish speaking countries, but for me, there's so much room for improvement. There's so much I can do to improve my language skills. And to go back to the point about teaching, as a teacher, I think you need to understand, you need to realize there's always going to be room for improvement, that you're always going to be able to get better. And again, that's the goal, is just to try and get better and better, because you can learn something from anyone. Even somebody who maybe you think, well, this person's not a good teacher. There's still some things that you can learn. And I think that you need to keep an open mind when it comes to improving, when it comes to learning. Because I think a lot of people, especially teachers, if you see somebody, and I think this same with any kind of environment, work environment. If you see somebody who you think, oh, I'm much better than that person, there's nothing that they can teach me. I think that's not the right attitude to have. You need to try and understand that, yes, there are so many things that we can teach each other. There are all you other English teachers who are watching this right now. There are so many things that I could learn from you. And I think that's so important that you need to understand that we can all learn from each other. And especially for teachers, I want to get back to that perfection point. You need to make sure, that lessons don't have to be perfect. All right. Because again, you're going to make mistakes, and it shouldn't be about, well, I need to make this perfect. You shouldn't be asking yourself, how can I make this perfect? Instead, what you should be asking yourself is, well, how can I make this better? Instead of how can I make it perfect, how can I make this better? And learners should be asking themselves the same thing. Your language skills do not have to be perfect. Instead of saying that, you should just be asking yourself, how can I make this better? And I want to talk to you a little bit about reflective teaching. When I lived in California before my wife and I moved to Europe. This is where I did my master's in TESOL, which is teaching English to speakers of other languages, and I did my final report on reflective teaching practices. And I think this is where you can try to reflect and understand what you need to do in order to do it better. And the whole idea about reflective teaching is where when you teach a lesson, you just think back about, okay, what did I do? What could I have done better? Did I make any mistakes? Why was there a mistake? How can I improve for the next time? And there's a lot of other methods you can go in there, like, for example, peer observations. It's an example of a reflective teaching practice because somebody else is watching your lesson, and then they're able to give some feedback, some advice, and you actually sit down and you're supposed to talk with that person about, okay, what did you see? What did you think about this? How can I improve? And you basically brainstorm some ideas. You reflect on the lesson that both of you, that one teacher gave and the other teacher observed, and you reflect on it and think about, well, how can you improve? What are some areas that you need to improve on, and how can you do that? So strive for improvement, not perfection. I would tell learners the same thing, because I think when it comes to language learning, so many people want, they say, oh, I want fluency. But again, fluency is different for different people, because what I think might be somebody fluent in a language might be different than what you think. So again, it goes back to this whole notion of, perfection. Things don't have to be perfect. It should all be all about, what do I need to do to improve? So those are some of my suggestions that I wanted to throw out for all of you. I hope that, especially for teachers, I hope that maybe you found it useful. If you're a learner, this is great listening practice. I hope that you learned some new vocabulary, and I will take this vocabulary and I will put it down in the description below so that all of you have it. And those of you who are watching it later, you'd be able to listen for those words as we go through the lesson. So again, if you like what we do here at Interactive English, if you want to sponsor or support our channel, you can check us out on YouTube with a membership, or even on Patreon. I've noticed some people today here in the chat. Thank you guys so much for being sponsors, for joining me today in these lessons. Links are in the description down below. So thank you guys again for joining me. Just want to say thank you to Artem, VJ, Parsa, Mary, Naima, Lali, Harriet, Aiden, thanks for joining me, Suhel. So again, I give these shout outs at the very end. I like being able to now sit back and actually kind of talk to you guys a little bit, because as we go through these lessons, I'll try to acknowledge some people, but sometimes it's a little difficult because I just want to go through and keep a continuous flow of the content. Thank you, Samuel, Stefana, have a good weekend too. Francesca, Carlos, Sleepwalker, Gertrudis, Nekla, Samuel, Sistana, Minati, Leda. I can just keep going, saying on names forever. And sorry if I mispronounce some names. Surbash, Dahir. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you guys next time.